Last but of course not least, I'd like to introduce my new friend Scott and Dianne Simpson from the Dr. Peter AIDS Foundation to talk to us about their programs, and after that we'll have time for questions. Oh good, that worked.
Hi everybody, for those of you who actually looked in your program, you're expecting Randy, and so I hope you're not too disappointed. I'm not Randy. I'm Scott Elliott. I'm the Executive Director of the Dr. Peter Center. Randy couldn't make it today. So I just want to start off by talking a little bit about who we are and kind of what we're doing. And I'm going to go back there. How many people here have heard of Dr. Peter? Can I sort of raise a hand? Most. How many people were born after 1992? A couple. Okay, so Dr. Peter actually passed away in 1992. So if you haven't heard about him, there's not too much of a surprise. But this morning during the Truth and Reconciliation, one of the things one of the speakers was talking about, just the importance of history and the importance of, knowing sort of what came before us. And Dr. Peter was one of those people. So he passed away, as I mentioned, in 1992. But before that, he was a doctor from Vancouver. He contracted HIV, and in those days, HIV led to AIDS, led to death. That was the prognosis as things went along. Shortly after he was diagnosed, he went blind. He wasn't able to practice as a medical doctor. And the fear and stigma and shame, things that we've been hearing about today, were so strong. Back in those days, in the States and lots of places around the world, people were being rejected from going into hospitals. Hospitals wouldn't take patients. Patients couldn't get access to what very little medication there was. So there was a huge kind of barrier. And what Dr. Peter did is he arranged to go on CBC television for 11 episodes. And those 11, just to chronicle his life. And those 11 episodes turned into 111 and lasted up until he passed away. So that's Dr. Peter. So just before he died, some of his friends came together and they put together the Dr. Peter AIDS Foundation. And the whole idea behind this was providing what we call comfort care. And when we talk about comfort care, what that really meant, and if you think about it in today's terms, that would be stigma-free and meeting you where you're at. So no matter where you're at, that's where we'll meet you. The key words kind of in this slide that I would pull out are integrated. Everything that we do is integrated, which what we mean by that, we're a clinical organization, so we have clinical outcomes, but we provide clinical services, we provide therapeutic services, and we provide food. Food cannot be underestimated. For the population that we deal with, food is why they come. We've actually done studies around it, research studies. The reason they come is food. Once they've had their food, they go to the nursing station, they stay for art therapy, they'll go to music therapy, they'll hang out and talk to counselors, but the reason they really come is food. And we have this clinical organization, but we do it in a non-clinical way. So we create a safe space. So if you walk in, you'll see the therapy dog lying around. You'll see people hanging out. We deal with the stereotypical downtown east side client. For those who aren't from here, that's a lot of addiction issues, a lot of mental health issues, and of course, HIV. We have 4 different programs, actually. We've listed 3 here. In the Day Health, we serve right now 387 clients, even though we're contracted for 350. We have 24 clients in our residence, and our residence takes people who are really medically compromised. Half of those people come in for long-term, and it could be end of life, and the other half of those people come in for 2 to 4 months. We stabilize, and we get them back in the community. We've got quite a few of our clients will never be reintegrated into the community, and they're not going to become your next CEO of a company. That's just not the reality that they're dealing with. So we have some clients that are enhanced supportive housing. What that means is we'll go and work with them on a daily basis. They'll come to the center for food and so forth. And more recently, just over the past actually year now, we've been doing consulting across, consulting across the country on supervised injection sites and how to set those up. We've been doing that for 16 years now. We were the first and still, as far as I know, the only organization to do supervised injection in a health center setting. So one of the key issues that we look at is is around harm reduction and is around addiction issues. Over the last, I just started with the Dr. Peter Center a year ago. I've known them for a long time, but I just started there. Over the last year since I've started, we've had 23 deaths. 16 of those were from overdose. None of them on site, but when they would go home in the evening and they would die at home. So we talk about the opioid crisis, especially here in Vancouver, and it is a crisis, but it's also, the word crisis I don't like because it's the new normal. A crisis to me entails it's going to go away. This is not going away. And so we have to find new ways of dealing with this, and we have to, we just have to look at it in that way. One of the other key issues that I see, and quite often, I was in HIV/AIDS kind of 20, 21 years ago. I got out of the sector saying I'd never come back. They were crazy, didn't want to work with them. And voila, here I am. And what I'm hearing all the time is that AIDS is over, blah, blah, blah. I'm here to tell you AIDS is not over. And I'm not just talking HIV. Everybody talks about HIV. We know that. We've got people in their 20s coming into our center with KS, Kaposi sarcoma. So that's the skin cancer that we saw in the 80s and 90s. We saw a lot of it. So that's full-blown indicated AIDS, okay? Even their viral suppression will come down once they go back on medications, because why they get it is because they're not on medication. Usually they're out partying and spending too much time on that side and not enough taking care of their health. Another key issue is stigma is alive and well. I heard a lot about that this morning. And I've spoken to some people, and they're going, well, HIV doesn't have a stigma anymore. It absolutely does, and our clients, and we'll tell you that very clearly. Isolation and loneliness, we hear a lot about that as well as a key issue. And a key issue for the Dr. Peter Center is over the years, we started off, with Dr. Peter, we were very firmly entrenched in the gay male kind of world. We're not anymore. We've lost that connection. And a lot of organizations that started in that community have lost that connection. Now, 60% of our clients identify as MSM, but MSM is not necessarily identifying as gay, and it's a very different aesthetic. A lot of ours come from the drug-using community, and so a lot of the gay men don't see themselves identified within our organization. And the same is true with women. We're only about 15 or 20%. 15% women, which is completely underrepresented. And we do have about 30% are First Nations, but we're not an Indigenous organization, but we're just starting now. We've just created a partnership with an organization called Indigenous Health and Healing, Dr. David Tu, and we're just trading back. Neither of us can really afford everything we need, so we're trading services. We're sending down art therapists, and they're sending us elders. So one of the population groups, aging gay men, or gay men aging with HIV. This is a brand new place to be. We've now got this cohort of people that have lived on medication for 20 to 30 years. And so there's no longitudinal studies of what the medication is going to do, how it affects us, nor are there really any experiences which talk to the trauma and the pain that these guys have gone through, having lost the vast majority of their friends 20 and 30 years ago, and now they're facing their own mortality. Aging is not for sissies. Aging sucks for everybody, I think, overall. But for this cohort, it becomes even more difficult. So we've created a program that is targeting and identifying and targeting aging gay men, especially those who are isolators. So we started a pilot project about a year ago, and I want to give a shout out to our presenting sponsor, VIV. VIV is the sponsor of this program as well, because we had to create it in the evening outside of our regular hours, because again, this group didn't identify with the population that comes for our day program. So we've put together this group, and just I'll have Dianne tell you more about the actual program. When we started it, we thought, okay, we'll create this program. We know there's lots of people out there who want it and need it. And it took us about 6 months before we got more than a dozen people coming, because they're isolators. Well, that just kind of makes sense. If they're isolators, they're not going to join, right? But it took us a while to kind of figure that out. So now there's about 45 or so enrolled in the program, and it's really robust. And one of the really cool things I see is I now see these people that come in through this entry point now attending our day program too, which is changing the balance and the look of our day program. And with that, I'll pass it over to Dianne.
Thanks, Scott. I'm going to do this, just because I can. So the evening program began through our peer researchers coming to us and saying that they were flagging some of these men that are in the community, living fairly isolated, struggling to get to appointments sometimes, and needing support. So we began a pilot program, a 13-week pilot project to see what we could do with these folks. Like Scott said, the recruitment and finding people who are isolated isn't always easy. And so our first night, we got all set and we opened the doors and we waited in the lobby and nobody came. And then the second week, one fellow came. And then after that, it was a combination actually of agencies talking to each other about the fact that we had this program going on, and also the guys talking to each other because they know each other. And so it kind of grew out of in that way. So the program components include art therapy, music therapy, counseling, recreation therapy, and we also have, as Scott was talking about, a meal together. And interestingly enough, it's a really important part because often these fellows are struggling to provide a nutritious food for themselves. There was one fellow that came in, excuse me, who sat down and said that that was the first full meal he had had for months because he doesn't cook for himself. He makes soup, makes toast. So within the program, the peer researchers worked alongside us and continued to collect data and ask questions to ensure that we were going in the right direction with the group. So aging, as typical aging, has issues to it. There's physical issues that surface, there's mental issues that surface. Social isolation, as we've talked about, becomes a part of their lives. Food insecurity in not being able to access, shop, or possibly afford nutritious food becomes a part of their lives. And also the ongoing stigma of living with HIV, being over 50, and having these issues. I'm not going to read all the excerpts, but these are comments that have been gathered by the peer researchers from some of the fellows that have come to the program over time. And the physical decline and the mental decline are coupled with ongoing medication that they've taken for years, becomes something that they have to deal with every day. And often some of these fellows would tell you that they're surprised that they're still alive and they're surprised that they're here. And so they're kind of getting by. So social isolation is, let's just read it. A recent Canadian study found that HIV-positive people over the age of 50 were generally more likely to have experienced depression, social isolation, and the use of psychotropic medications. A cohort of veterans over 55 in the United States found a higher prevalence of social isolation among veterans with HIV compared to those without HIV, and with increasing difference according to age. In the group, so alleviating the social isolation and bringing these fellows together, they began exchanging experiences. They began exchanging their histories, their experiences in the gay community and in the HIV community, and they've begun to kind of form a group.
I'm just going to move this forward. We have 1 minute left.
Oh, we have a minute left. Okay. I can't see him, so I'm just going to roll. Okay. It's like this, right? No. Grief and loss. when we began, we were looking at let's support them in their health care, let's support them with nutrition. And very soon after we began, the topic of grief and loss, their own grief and loss, and also the community's grief and loss over time, having lived through the late 80s and the 90s where men were dying of HIV a lot. And so the other thing was men coming to the group and have had lost partners that they've had for a really long time, years, and then being in their 50s and 60s, having to cope with being single again, being a single gay man, and still living with HIV and other physical issues. Food insecurity, as we mentioned before, is a topic, and it's something that the program that we offer provides for. We also, within the food security topic, as we provide a dinner together, our chef also provides recipes and ideas and things that people can do on their own. He's even done a little thing, how to shop inexpensively, things like that. So to help them stay as independent as possible where they are without being isolated and being able to come to the program. Did you want to speak to stigma?
I think we've heard lots about stigma. There's lots of stigma.
There's lots of stigma. Stigma, as far as the eye can see. Yeah.
Stigma is there, it's alive, it rears its head.
So lessons learned. That stigma is a real thing, and it's something that we still need to address. And I think that in this particular vein, that stigma are being an HIV positive man over 50. I think the oldest fellow that came to our program once or twice was 82, and he got himself out and made it to the program. But so these fellows still living with HIV, being elderly, and still working, having worked to work against the stigma of being HIV, and also having to work against the stigma of being elderly.
Thank you.
Thank you.